Back to another Polytux episode, and today we'll be covering a hypothetical polling scenario for the 2024 presidential election. And this is a very real scenario, as Joe Biden has already stated his intention to run again, and we are awaiting his formal announcement, whereas Donald Trump, of course, has already announced long ago, and simply has to charge through a field of Republican primary challengers, none other than Nikki Haley and potentially Ron Desantis. So we'll see if he is able to accomplish that, and if he is, then this will indeed be the 2024 election scenario, a complete rematch of 2020. And this would be certainly a very difficult election to characterize because you have so many different layers. It would be, we don't know how Donald Trump running twice will have an impact, Joe Biden's age. All of these things are still up in the air. What we do know is there has been hypothetical polling, and this trend is not holistic, but we have seen in general that most of the polls tend to skew towards Joe Biden. It is interesting to point out that this is certainly not a clearly or heavily noticeable occurrence, and Trump does win many hypothetical polling scenarios according to various polling companies. However, we can see that on the whole, Joe Biden is slightly outperforming the polls, but what we have to glean from this is also the polls have been wildly inaccurate in recent years. In 2020, they overestimated Democrats. In 2022, they underestimated Democrats. And so who knows what might happen with the polls in 2024. So that's why today I will be doing my own analysis, my own prediction of this hypothetical presidential election. And of course, I will be providing background and justification for each major swing state I call. But first, as always, we will start with the safe states, and I'm going to be a little more liberal with safe states this time because simply I think any state that has over a 90% chance of going to Joe Biden, no matter what I expect the margin to be, I don't think it's very worth talking about at this point with our limited time. Certainly we do not need to go over every safe state such as this, although it's important to note there are many, and that is a major factor, which means that many of the electoral votes are already decided, and simply the other electoral votes will be determined, of course, by swing states, and those, of course, are what's determining the election. So we've seen, of course, that the Electoral College certainly allows for a select group of states to decide the outcome, but that's simply how things are. So we'll characterize this. The entirety of Nebraska is not quite red. I'm going to leave Nebraska's, I believe it's the 2nd district, as a toss-up, and continue forward with the rest of my safe states, which even includes states potentially like Washington on the Democrat side that have a possibility of not going to the respective candidate by a safe margin, but I still believe that their possibility of winning far eclipses any meaningful discussion we can glean from discussing whether, of course, Washington is safe or likely. I do think that is a matter that is not worth pursuing, and forgive me as I simply continue to characterize these safe states. So we've got many of them, most of them, I would say, and I definitely have left a few to be characterized as lean or likely. I would say, actually, Alaska, even though it has shown an ability to elect a Democrat in recent years, I certainly do believe that it's still red on the presidential election. Maybe I'll set it to likely. Actually, it can be a first likely because Alaska is trending a little blue, in my opinion, and it hasn't been a complete blowout in past presidential elections as it should be if Alaska were a safe state. Iowa's another one I think is teetering red on the brink, but I'll put it as safe just because in a presidential year, you never know what might happen, and this is certainly not as cut and dry as many of these other states, which are not even worth discussing. Iowa's one that is certainly heavily skewed towards Republicans, but could, in fact, later down the line, potentially inspire some meaningful discussion. Colorado is another likely state. I think it's just transitioning from likely to safe for Democrats, so I won't have to make that characterization very longer. Same with New Mexico and Virginia, I would say. All of these states, I do expect, I would be extremely surprised if any other result happened than a Democrat winning. So I think in terms of probability, these states are safe, but in terms of margins, which I use, I do expect them not to be quite as massive blowouts as they could be. So I think Colorado will be around 15 points, New Mexico around 15 points, Virginia around 15 points, and that has nothing to do with the percentage probability, merely the but merely the margin I do expect these states to trend. So enough of that ramble. Minnesota, I'd say is likely for Democrats. I forgot to characterize Missouri as safe for Republicans. Like Indiana, I think Ohio in recent years. I think this one we've already really discussed in the past. 2 consecutive presidential elections. Democrats did not improve here at all, basically, between those 2. Senate election, they also did quite meh. So I think Ohio is kind of a lost cause for Democrats in 2024. And Illinois, of course, is a likely Democratic state. Definitely in terms of probabilities, it's high up there, but it does have a large population, and certainly not all of that population agrees. So many of them have different opinions, and so Illinois is, I'd say, kind of a likely state for Democrats for sure. And then North Carolina, I'm tempted to do is likely, but I won't for now. And then last 2, Texas. That probably not happened this election cycle. So Texas, for sure, has been trending a little in Democrats' favor over the years, but certainly is still skewed Republican and will remain that way for a few years to come. So I'm not too worried about that characterization. New Hampshire, I believe, is likely for Democrats. They've had great results there, and it's been very difficult for Republicans, besides Chris Sununu, the wildly popular governor there, to win. Very difficult for them to win. So then we'll also go to Florida. This would be a surprise a few years ago, but nowadays I think it's pretty clear that Florida has been shifting very heavily rightward in actually a relatively short amount of time. So that one is also a likely, I believe. And Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and to an extent North Carolina are all the core swing states that do not have a strong inclination to either party, and we're actually pretty well matched. I would say Nebraska's 2nd district on the presidential level is forgetting DC, and I say on the presidential level, I say Nebraska's 2nd district is probably likely for Democrats. It's gone by 7 points to Joe Biden in the past, so certainly would not be surprised with that. That puts Democrats as a slight advantage, 227 to 218, but certainly this is no obstacle to Republicans winning, and they still have a very great chance. So let's dive right into this, starting, I suppose, with the Great Lakes states. So Wisconsin, which I do think is tilt Democratic, and the reason I say tilt is I think the state has been shifting a little whiteward in recent years, but I think it still has enough blue energy within it to certainly deliver Democrats another win here in 2024, especially against someone they've already rejected once. Then again, they have accepted them once, but those were under different circumstances and different times. So, Michigan, I do believe, is a lean for Democrats. I think I've mentioned this in other videos, like my Senate video, that I think Michigan is still quite a solid blue state. It's certainly not on the likely level, but I think it does deserve a light blue or likely classification, simply due to the fact that it's actually remained quite reliable and constant for Democrats. And then Pennsylvania, I think, is the same story pretty much. Maybe a little more competitive than Michigan, but certainly has a lot of Democratic energy. And I do think Democrats will win there. Of course, Trump's secret to the White House last time was to snatch the Rust Belt and eliminate its Democratic proclivity. So he turned it in Republicans' favor, and that's how he was able to win the election. So it's certainly not impossible. As of right now, that's where I see it. And already Democrats have won. 270, game over. And even if, for whatever reason, Republicans won Nebraska's first district, Democrats would still win by the lowest margin possible, which is 270. And that could be anywhere from 270 to 268, all the way up to, I'm doing my math correctly, 239 to, or, yeah, 239 to, sorry, wait to consider this, no, it goes to 538, so that would be 268. So that's one option. Or I see. Okay. So alternatively, that 50 could be 51. So it could be anywhere from 321 to sorry. My sincerest apologies. This was not anticipated. So essentially, I'm just going over in my head the various potential outcomes for this election. So, what is the range after we've characterized the least unlikely states for Democrats? So, assuming Republicans get only 219, Democrats would receive. Oh, there we go. They would receive 319. So that would be a massive victory for Democrats, expanding about 2020 and having a great night, but I do not expect that will be the case this time. We've still got multiple states left to decide the 2024 election, or not decide it, but simply determine the electoral vote numbers. So Nevada is another lean state for Democrats. I've always made the joking analogy of how this state is similar to North Carolina, except for the opposite party, where it seems to be such a close state within grasp and of potentially a, picking up electoral votes or Senate seat or House seats, but then it never quite seems to fall Republicans' way. That's how North Carolina operates as well. Simply a strange political fact. We should obviously not trust exclusively what has happened in the past for our characterizations of the future, but I do think Nevada is another state where I think there is still a lot of Democrat support there, and I don't see it dissipating anytime soon. So now we have 3 states left. Of course, don't matter at this point, but they do matter for our analysis. So I'd say let's just get Georgia out of the way, which I think is a tilt blue, and we've seen Georgia go blue multiple times in the past. It's still red for the most part, but on the presidential against Donald Trump, who is a relatively weak candidate, I do expect this one would go to Democrats yet again. So I would be surprised if another outcome happened, unless, of course, Trump is able to have massive appeal in the Sun Belt, which is certainly not impossible. And then we have 2 states left, so Arizona, I would say, is also tilt blue, simply because of the unstable nature in the state and the fact that it is very close. In fact, if you look at the Attorney General's race, I believe it was only separated by a matter of a few hundred votes, and it's very clear that the state is closely divided. It's the ideal perfect purple state, and for that reason, I can only characterize it as a tilt blue, judging based on what's happened in the past and also what I expect to happen in the future with trends and so on. So now we just have 1 state left, which I think will be a lean red. So there we go. So that is North Carolina. I also believe that North Carolina would go to Republicans, like I said, kind of the Nevada of the Republicans, and it's hard to see a Democrat really pulling a great campaign here unless they really try. So now we have got 235 Republican electoral votes to Democrats 303. It is a solid victory for Democrats. And in fact, I believe this is pretty much, yes, if not exactly the same map as the actual results of the 2020 presidential election. So that's kind of telling of how right now a lot of our predictions are based on what has happened in the past. Or I should actually modify this because I did say that the Democrats will win Nevada's 2nd district. Yeah, so 304 to 234 is the final tally after that change. So, yes, as I was saying, we cannot let them influence our current too much, but then on the other hand, they can be helpful studying state trends. So I will certainly leave them there. And I would say that now we can say that in this scenario, I do believe that Joe Biden would definitely have a much more dominant performance and best Donald Trump for sure. And that is simply because Donald Trump is not a great candidate. He's not a very electable candidate, and he has already lost once before. So unless something drastic happens, which it always may, I do believe that we will have another 4 years of Biden, and Trump will be rebuked yet again. So that is just one possible scenario of the 2024 presidential election. There are many more, but this is just probably the most common, most likely one, and also the most recognized one is what most people may think about when they think about what the 2024 election could be. So that is all for now. Thank you so much for listening to Politalks, and I will be back to you soon. See you.